things can come out of that meeting. Stop the bloodshed of the horrible, it's a bloodbath.
What we have with the Chinese is a mechanism to avoid an upward tariff pressure like we did last time.
I've done nothing wrong. I pray that the system that we have in place upholds what's right and what's good.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, well, the stock market soared as the U.S. and China agreed to roll back tariffs imposed in this tit-for-tat trade war, and doing so at least for now. There is an agreement. It's a light agreement, but it will see a 90-day reduction on the trade levies. Stay tuned for future details and specifics. We're going to try in this program to answer what it might mean for easing not only trade tensions between the United States and China, but worldwide. Also, the end of an 18-month ordeal. Hamas releases the last surviving American hostage held in Gaza. Edon Alexander is now free. The move might be another step toward a ceasefire, despite intense bombing today across the Gaza Strip after Alexander's release. Also, wheels up. President Trump on his way to the Middle East. It's his first multi-country international trip, the second term in office. Stops are scheduled in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. President, while there, hopes to strengthen ties with the Gulf states and talk trade, Iran, peace with Israel, Hamas, and other pressing topics. We're going to start tonight with Willie James Inman at the White House. Willie, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Talk to me about the announcement from the president today and what you heard at the White House about what sounds to me to be a significant de-escalation with China and the trade standoff with tariffs.
Yeah, Major, that's right. Good to be with you as well. We saw a significant step forward in terms of a de-escalation with that trade war between the U.S. and China, as you mentioned. Now, that tariff rate from the U.S. on imported Chinese goods have been set at 145%. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, outlined that it would now go down to down from 115%, so 30% a rate for those goods imported into the U.S. So that 10% baseline tariff is still there. That fentanyl tariff is still there with that 30% rate. So for the next 90 days, the sides are going to negotiate and talk about a path forward towards a more significant deal. So this is at least the framework of a conversation for a deal down the road. The White House is saying this is a trade deal, but it's not necessarily that. They have an agreement to talk further. The Chinese, for their part, they are essentially going to set their tariffs at 10%. That would be down from 125%. They're also willing to open up some non-monetary trade barriers to U.S. goods into their country. So a lot more to talk about here, a lot more details to be worked out. But at least for now, the White House and the president included is pitching this as a victory to the American people.
And the president, of course, built the tariff escalator up. He is now reversing it, and it's going back down, and the Chinese are following in suit. Talk to us, Willie, about this airplane from the Qatari government, a gift to the United States, I guess to the Defense Department, possibly in line to become a temporary version of Air Force One?
Yeah, this news broke over the weekend, and there is a lot of concern about the ethical implications of this, about whether or not the president can accept such an opulent gift. It is a multi-million-dollar jet, a 747-8 to be specific. This is essentially a more modern version of the 747, the big jet, the jumbo jet with the 4 engines that people are used to seeing the president ride aboard Air Force One. That is the jet that he took, of course, to head towards the Middle East. Look, this jet and this donation, as is being described, would essentially say to people around the world that the U.S. government is willing to accept these types of gifts. But the White House maintains that they're going to follow the law, that they're looking into the legal ramifications of this. The president, as you see there on social media, defending this, saying this is free of charge. And he essentially said, why wouldn't he accept this? Why wouldn't he accept a free jet? But there are some questions about what the Qataris want out of this. Do they want further investment, continued investment in a military base, for instance, the largest military base in the Middle East that the U.S. operates there in the region. There are some concerns on Capitol Hill. In fact, some criticism coming from Leader Schumer, a Democrat, the leader in the Senate. He essentially said nothing says America first like Air Force One bought to you by Qatar. It's not just bribery, it's premium foreign influence with extra legroom. That criticism coming from Leader Schumer there in the Senate. So a lot more questions about this jet and whether or not it will happen. And the Qataris, for their part, they're saying essentially that there's no final decision made, that this is still under consideration about how this will happen and indeed when the transfer of this jet could potentially happen, Major.
And having flown numerous times on Air Force One, I can tell you, Willie James, Inman, and the audience, that a substantial, and I mean substantial, and costly amount of retrofitting would have to go on to make any gifted jet to the United States government security worthy of the president's travel. Willie James Inman, thank you very much. I appreciate it. American-Israeli hostage Idan Alexander was freed today by Hamas after more than 19 months in captivity. This, as you can see, is the video of his reunification with his family. It is believed that Idan was the last living U.S. citizen held hostage in Gaza. The 21-year-old grew up in New Jersey. He was serving in the Israeli military when he was abducted during the October 7th terrorist attacks. I want to turn now to our MTS Tayyab, who brings us the latest from the region.
Well, in what both Hamas and President Trump have branded a goodwill gesture, Idan Alexander, the 21-year-old dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, was freed after 19 long months of captivity in Gaza. Now, the New Jersey-born Israeli soldier was the last known American still held hostage after the October 7th attacks, and his release came with effectively no strings attached. That means no prisoner swap and no political trade-off between Israel and Hamas, which is really what we're seeing is a rare alignment of interests between, frankly, the militant group and a president as he embarks on his first overseas tour of his second term. Now, the deal itself was brokered quietly through four-way diplomacy involving the U.S., Qatar, Egypt, and Hamas. And we, of course, have seen those emotional images of Alexander reuniting with his family. But for many Israelis, they cut both ways. A moment of joy, yes, but also a sharp reminder that scores of other hostages remain in Gaza. And of course, for Palestinians, the unrelenting violence there only grinds on. Now, Hamas says it's ready for what it calls immediate and intensive talks to end the war. Israel, for now, says it's only willing to negotiate under fire, which is a policy that, in effect, guarantees the violence won't stop. And as we've been reporting, tens of thousands of Palestinians are dead. Famine is tightening its grip, and Gaza's hospitals are barely functioning. Still, there is some diplomatic foot traffic. Israel has sent a delegation to Cairo, but these talks have become almost ritualistic in their futility, because while there's movement, there's also rarely any meaningful progress in those talks. Back to you.
Almost ritualistic in their futility. MTS Tayyab, thank you very much. First on CBS News, the top Democrat on the House Administration Committee has requested an investigation into the Trump administration's communications with the Library of Congress and its employees. This after the sudden firing of Dr. Carla Hayden, who was in the 9th year of her 10-year term as the Librarian of Congress. I'm going to bring in CBS News Justice Department correspondent Scott McFarland. Scott, always good to see you. Catch us up.
Not used to flashpoint issues popping at the Library of Congress.
No, we are not.
But here we are.
These are flashpoint-heavy times.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. Dr. Hayden's firing was a surprise to all involved, including her employees, we're told. She was fired in a brief email from the Trump personnel office late Friday. And in the time since, the administration has named Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, Trump's former criminal defense lawyer, to be the acting Librarian of Congress. The issue here, though, is the rationale. There are supporters of this firing. There are detractors. The White House press secretary defended this, saying that Dr. Hayden was pushing a DEI initiative and that she was giving access to children of inappropriate books. And I think the critics of this firing would say that's a misunderstanding of how the Library of Congress functions. It's a research library. It's Congress's research arm. It's not the town library down the street where kids go and peruse. What's more, you have to be 18 years old to get a reading card there if you're far enough along in your progress to want a reading card at the Library of Congress. In the meantime, there's an investigation that the Democrats are launching into whether there was inappropriate communication by the executive branch into the Library of Congress. It's a separation of powers issue ready to boil over here.
Right. What are the authorities of the executive branch to fire the Librarian of Congress?
I think they're testing them here, and we'll see if there's legal pushback. We'll see if Dr. Hayden or some surrogate is to file suit to try to challenge this. But this is in line, Major, with other firings that have been tested in the courts when the Trump administration fired government watchdogs, inspectors general, those who the president appoints have some oversight of and from Congress. This one feels like a lawsuit waiting to happen.
And just to underscore the point you made about children, access to books, this isn't like a reading corner where you can just stroll in, plop down, and pull any book off the shelf. The Library of Congress, if you've been there, and I have many times, I've used it as a research library, doesn't have elaborate security, but it has not insignificant security. Using it is a kind of process. It's not a walk-in, plop down, grab a book deal.
There's also a different dynamic to this library versus any other. In the exhaustiveness of their collection. I mean, they continue to accrue new items every day by the hundreds, if not by the thousands. They are a repository for the copyright system, so people are submitting work as part of the copyright process. So though they may not have hard copies of things available, they have a voluminous collection that would stretch many, many miles if you put the bookshelves side by side.
No doubt.
This is a different type of world.
Before I let you go, there have been significant and restrictive changes to refugee access to this country under the Trump administration until today, when a flight of refugees from South Africa arrived at Dulles International.
It was quite a sight. I was there at the hangar that was used to accept these 59 Afrikaners from South Africa, almost all of them white, many of them small children. They were ushered in for a meeting with a Deputy Secretary of State, a Deputy Department of Homeland Security official. We were not given access to ask them any questions or talk with them, nor were we given the opportunity to ask questions of the Trump administration. But this photo op was provided, and it's a message they're trying to send that the U.S. has done strong vetting, they argue, of these 59 people. They argue that the doors they've closed to other refugees are because of poor vetting by the Biden administration, that just anybody was being let in, is what one Trump administration official said. This group, they say, is narrow, and narrow for a reason. But there's going to be any number of criticisms of this because of the political and the otherwise complexion of these individuals.
And the administration argues that these are refugees because they are being persecuted in their home country, and there is a racial aspect to that persecution. Is there data that backs up that assertion?
The argument they made is that they face, quote, harrowing circumstances and they face death threats. That what they discussed today publicly was anecdotal, but I expect the Trump administration is going to get pressed on that, show us more data if we're going to let in more people through this means.
Scott McFarland, thank you, sir, as always. The CDC is reporting the highest number of measles cases for a single year since 2019. The former acting director of that agency will join me next to discuss. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. To much fanfare, President Trump signed an executive order today that he said was aimed at lowering prescription drug costs by having the United States government match the lowest prices paid for some medicines by other nations and cutting out what he called middlemen.
Nobody knows who they are, middlemen. I've been hearing the term for 25 years, middlemen. I don't know who they are, but they're rich. They're worse than the drug companies. They don't even make a product, and they make a fortune.
Joining me now, Dr. Richard Besser. He formerly served as the acting director of the CDC. It's great to have you with us, Doctor. Give me your general reaction. I've watched many presidents that I've covered try to tackle this issue. Disparity in drug prices through executive orders. They don't go very far. Congress has to be involved. The president said today that Congress is owned by Big Pharma. Can't do it. The only way I can do it is through an executive order. Is any of this actually going to happen?
Well, you know, Major, we'll see. I don't have a lot of faith that an executive order is the way to get this done. There is legislation that allows Medicare, part of the U.S. government, to negotiate drug prices, and that I think would be a much more effective way to do this. You know, the point is well taken, though. We spend more on drugs than any other wealthy nation. You know, in America, your ability to pay for your drugs has a lot to do with whether or not you have health insurance, and that's tied very much to whether you have a job. This administration is doing a lot to take away health insurance from individuals. The proposed cuts to Medicaid could lead to millions of people losing their health insurance. So while on the one hand, I support efforts to reduce the cost of drugs that people are paying, that should be something that is benefited by everyone in our country by making sure that everyone has access to health insurance.
And just to your point, Doctor, what happens in Congress, where Republicans, as you just indicated on the House side, are making changes to Medicaid and access, that would be real. Executive orders, much less real. So what's happening in the real world legislatively could have much more significant impact than this executive order.
Exactly. An executive order like this is good television. What's happening in Congress is quite worrisome. The idea that hardworking people who have jobs that don't come with health insurance may lose their health insurance because they're going to be excluded from Medicaid, that is really worrisome and shouldn't be something we see in our country.
Talk to my audience, if you'd be so kind, Doctor, about where we are with measles, how alarmed or non-alarmed you are, and what context we should put it in.
Major, I'm very concerned. We have seen more than 1,000 cases of measles this year. 25 years ago, the U.S. was certified as having eliminated measles. And while we've seen cases every year since then, we haven't seen the kind of transmission that we're seeing now. There have been 3 people who've died from measles. And the big concern is that, that number you see there of 709 cases in Texas, well, viruses don't respect borders. So we are going to see this virus spreading to any community that hasn't been able to maintain very high levels of measles vaccination. And we currently have a Secretary of Health who, before he held that title, did more than just about anyone in our nation to undermine people's trust and confidence in our vaccine system. I practiced pediatrics for over 30 years, and there was nothing I did as a pediatrician that had more value than making sure my patients were vaccinated fully and on time. And that took the spending time with each patient, answering their questions, making sure that they felt comfortable in their decision to vaccinate their children. So I recommend to viewers, talk to your doctor, talk to your nurse, talk to your pharmacist, and see what their perspective is on vaccination, because it clearly, from my perspective, is the best way to protect your family, your friends, your neighbors, and your community.
And Dr. Besser, as you know, this particular administration is not shy when it comes to communication. It talks a lot about a lot of different subjects. Could it be more emphatic about vaccinations and this particular outbreak?
Definitely. There is nothing that you can do that has more value in a situation like this than checking to make sure your child is vaccinated, that you as an adult are fully vaccinated, because this is the most contagious virus that we know of. And so if you have a community where fewer than 95% of people are vaccinated, a school with lower than 95%, you will see spread. And unfortunately, it will be seen in those children who may not have been able to get vaccinated because they may have a disability, they may have a medical condition that prevents them from getting vaccinated. We need to make sure that we protect everyone in our community by ensuring that we are vaccinated ourselves.
Dr. Richard Besser, thank you so much for your time, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Major.
The Newark, New Jersey mayor charged with trespassing after his arrest at an ICE, that's Immigration Customs and Enforcement facility. Next, his conversation with CBS News, as well as an exclusive look inside the detention center in which he was held. Plus, a tariff truce with China, maybe, maybe not. Kelly O'Grady standing by with how the markets reacted and what it might all mean. That's next right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Big headline this morning, all about tariffs, China, United States, what's going on? Was it a breakthrough? Was it not? Is it terminal, temporary? Who knows? This is the president, though, talking about it.
We achieved a total reset with China after productive talks in Geneva. Both sides now agreed to reduce the tariffs imposed after April 2nd to 10% for 90 days as negotiators continue in the larger structural issues.
I'm going to turn now to CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, great to see you. Thanks so much for helping me out here. Terminal, I used that word a second ago. That might have been the effect on the U.S. economy had this not happened. And it is temporary. There's lots of details to be sorted out, but the president started all this. Now it feels as if he's backing away from a good share of it.
Yeah, I think there's a big question around how much damage was done to the economy with consumer sentiment, with businesses canceling all these orders from China. You can't just press a button and everything goes back to normal. This does take a while. But I point to what happened in the markets today. You had investors celebrating. I mean, when this news broke, I got a phone call waking me up at 4 a.m., Major, and then I was immediately on the phone with investors saying, how do you feel about this? And there was a lot of optimism that this happened so quickly and what could be gotten in the future from all of this momentum. But there was also the caveat that 7 years ago, almost to the day, Major, it was Trump 1.0. There was a cease between the China and the U.S. During that trade war. And a few weeks later, it was back to tit-for-tat retaliation. So there's optimism, but also the knowledge that we have been here before, and the roller coaster did continue.
And Kelly, it strikes me as fascinating that in this dialogue, the United States is lowering its tariffs with China before it lowers them for anyone else in the region. And listening to what the Trump administration was saying just last week, the idea was to isolate China and do other deals first. And the sequencing seems to be in a completely different space.
Well, the tariffs on China at 30% are still higher than the others in the region because they did go down to that 10% baseline after that April 9th pause on reciprocal tariffs. But there does seem to be momentum on these other fronts. And remember, you've had businesses coming to the White House, including Target and Walmart, saying, President Trump, they're going to be empty shelves. And I think there's an element of concern about what that could mean long term.
Real quickly, is 90 days, this temporary allocation of time, going to change any of the calculations that you just mentioned? Businesses trying to make forward-looking investment choices, hiring choices, and the like.
I think you're going to see a surge in imports again, like we did in March, but you are going to see businesses hold off on making any long-term investments, whether that be reshoring or ordering product maybe for the holidays.
Kelly O'Grady, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for helping me out. Back to President Trump's executive order on prescription drug prices. Here was the president earlier.
We are going to pay the lowest price there is in the world. We will get whoever is paying the lowest price. That's the price that we're going to get. So remember that.
Sounds too good to be true. Is it? Well, to help me figure that out, I'm joined by Julie Robner, who is the chief Washington correspondent for Kaiser Health News and one of the best reporters in this space. I've known Julie for years. Thanks so much for coming in. Is it too good to be true?
Well, it's certainly...
the president said today, over and over again, drug prices are going to come down 59%, 60%, 70%. Basically asking the American people to hold him to that standard.
There's nothing in this executive order that's going to make that happen. At least nothing that's going to make it happen immediately. This was a priority for the president in his first term. As you and I know, this is an issue that dates back decades. Right. Americans pay more for drugs than anyone in any other country, primarily because we don't really have a organized healthcare system the way most every other country does. They negotiate the prices of their drugs.
Very quickly on that, when there's a single payer, meaning the government is the payer, it negotiates directly. And that's one of the reasons. We don't have that, which is one of the reasons we have these higher rates.
But even when there isn't a single payer, there's some kind of organized way to negotiate drug prices. And we don't have that. And that's why we pay the highest prices in the world.
I read the executive order, facilitate, study, propose. That all sounds a little fuzzy to me.
Yeah, that's what most people are saying. And in fact, even the drug industry didn't seem terribly concerned by this, which suggests that it doesn't do a whole lot, or they would be a lot more concerned.
When we were talking to Dr. Richard Besser, we listened to a soundbite from the president talking about the middlemen. Let's just remind our audience of some very relevant recent history about drug price setting or participating middlemen. They're called
Pharmacy benefit managers.
PBMs, right?
That's right.
There was something in Congress in December about that. Tell my audience, remind my audience what happened.
There was a negotiated bill, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans. It was in that big final bill that was supposed to go to then President Biden's desk. And
a continuing resolution to keep the government over.
It was attached to the continuing resolution. And Elon Musk, wrote on social media that, what is all the rest of this stuff in this bill and why is it here? And then President-elect Trump said, yeah, and off it went. So it is still there, negotiated, ready to be passed, ready to actually do something about making more transparency for these drug middlemen who negotiate, to the extent there is negotiation, who negotiate the prices. Congress could pass it tomorrow if they wanted to.
And there would be with that some prospect of lowering costs.
Some, not 70, 80%, but at least we would have a better idea of how they're doing it and how much money of it that they're keeping.
And when the president, Julie, said, as he did over and over today, well, all these other countries, once we start using our authorities, are going to have to give us this price. They're going to have to. They will have no choice. Is that even remotely true?
It's not the countries that are selling us the drug. It's the drug makers that are selling us the drugs. So, I mean, eventually we're going to have to negotiate with the drug makers.
And the representatives for the pharmaceutical lobby make a very aggressive case to members of Congress, to the media, to the administration. It's very costly to do the research on this. A lot of things we research don't come to market, so we have to have a price structure that allows for that experimentation. Some things hit, and when they hit colossally, but a lot of things don't. Is that spin, or is that more true than not?
It's both.
Okay, it's both.
It has always been both. I mean, it's true that to some extent the U.S. is subsidizing every other country. The president's right when he talks about that.
That he's on point with.
Absolutely. But, bringing our prices down to all of the other countries', price control set prices, what that would do to the industry, not entirely clear.
Mm-hmm. And it's possible there could be less choice overall if, in fact, all these rates were brought down because there'd be less research and fewer new drugs,
yes.
Possibly.
Yes.
That's one of the things that is.
It is. And then, of course, you can talk about what's going on the research side, too, on the NIH side, on the government research, but that's another discussion.
That's another discussion for another day. So glad to have you here. Julie
Nice
Roberts, thank you very much. In a CBS News exclusive, our Homeland Security correspondent Nicole Skanga got a first look inside the detention center where the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, Ross Baraka, was arrested and then later charged with trespassing. Nicole Skanga joins me now. Nicole, catch us up. What do you know?
Yeah, so let me walk you through our day here, Major. We arrived at 7 a.m. sharp. We had to keep our cell phones in the car. We were wanded down and we were taken through the onboarding process, told that all detainees there are given a full physical exam by a medical professional within 12 hours. We saw the outdoor recreational facility. We saw the booths from which detainees are permitted to call their families or their legal representation. And we really pushed the acting ICE director, Todd Lyons, who gave us this tour. What are the conditions like, knowing that this has been at the center of an immigration political firestorm? Take a listen to what he had to say. I think immigration advocates would question whether this facility is humane. What would you say to folks who have doubts?
Well, what I would say is that I'm very happy that you came to allow us to pull the curtain back and show exactly the facility and what it's like here. I think it is humane. ICE detention standards are some of the highest out there when it comes to detention. Obviously, we don't detain in a punitive way. We detain to remove individuals from the country.
And Major, one thing that stood out to us, this is a 1,000-bed facility that opened on May 1st. There were 152 detainees there, roughly 15% capacity. When we asked the ICE director why, he said he lacked federal coordination with local law enforcement assistance from police departments in New York and New Jersey. We also asked about due process. We know the White House has considered suspending habeas corpus, that legal right to challenge one's detention in court, citing a quote-unquote invasion, that is an influx of migrants into the U.S. He told us that he believed due process was fully in place at the facility. And when we asked him, is he scared if it's going to go away, we were ushered out of the building. Later, ICE officials told us it was for security reasons, but he did not answer that question.
I'm very glad you mentioned that, Nicole. Also, you spoke with the mayor of Newark. What did he have to say?
Yeah, well, the mayor of Newark was arrested on Friday for illegally trespassing by HSI agents. He was walked off the premises. He was detained for 4 to 5 hours at a separate detention facility. He described that to me in detail. Take a listen.
He finally was like, just leave, just leave, just leave. So I left. I left and went on the other side of the gate said, this is crazy. In fact, when I got on the other side of the gate, the Congress people went back in and was about to begin their tour. They told him to come on, we're going to do the tour now. He got a phone call, as you're going to see on the video that we give you. He got a phone call. God only knows who called him. But when he got the phone call, the plans changed. So he left from doing the tour to come outside of the gate, down on the public side where I was, to arrest me with about 15 ICE agents, which caused melee.
And the mayor there referring to the special agent in charge of HSI who was there to witness his arrest. He denies any allegations that he trespassed. He also brought up the fact, Major, that he had been there to attend a press conference and says he's been showing up every day to try to help city officials who are trying to inspect for fire and safety hazards inside that ICE detention facility and have not been permitted inside.
HSI stands for Homeland Security Investigations, if I remember correctly, Nicole. And what is the state of the case against Mayor Baraka?
Yeah, he has been prosecuted on federal charges, or we should say indicted on federal charges of trespass on federal property. His first court appearance occurs on Thursday, 10 a.m.
Nicole Skanga, long day for you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. The Earth is flat. Checks notes. No, it's not. 9/11 was an inside job. Checks notes. No, that's not true either. But these conspiracy theories and more, once pretty much out on the far edges of the extremes, well, they have now entered something approximating the mainstream of our political conversation. Our next guest explains how President Trump's return to power has in some measure elevated these beliefs, even though the president himself does not directly promote them. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Since his re-election in November, President Trump has championed several figures who regularly share largely disproven theories, frequently referred to as conspiracy theories. Tiffany Hsu joins me now from San Francisco. She's a technology reporter for the New York Times who recently wrote about this. Tiffany, I'm going to pay you a very high compliment. I'm going to read the lead of your story because I wish I had written it myself. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, control room is going to be very aggravated with me. We don't have a graphic on this. Just please listen. It's going to be worth your time. People who question whether the earth is round, a fact understood by the ancient Greeks and taught to American children in elementary school, might have been political pariahs a decade ago. Now, they're running local Republican parties in Georgia and Minnesota and seeking public office in Alabama. Wow. Explain to me, based on your reporting, Tiffany, what the potential ramifications of that might be.
Well, when you think about these formerly very fringe conspiracy theories suddenly appearing in the halls of power, they're suddenly in very close proximity to policymakers and policies affect the average American. So if you have people who believe that, as a recent Truth Plus documentary claims, that lizard people descended from aliens are running the world's major religions, that if people who believe things like that are controlling the policy that controls our lives, there might be something to be a little worried about.
And during the QAnon phenomenon that grew up and sort of got very accelerated during lockdowns, during COVID, this lizard people thing was a real thing.
And I can't believe I'm saying this, but this goes even beyond QAnon at this point. We've got people who believe in flat Earth, people who believe that 9/11 was an inside job, people who believe that there are two shooters involved in the JFK assassination. These are far out conspiracy theories that are now fully in the mainstream. These are being voiced by cabinet members, by people who run agencies, by members of Congress, by the president's right-hand man. These are people who are figures of authority saying these sorts of things.
When you reference the president's right-hand man, please name check that person for me.
That would be the man known as Elon Musk, who has recently suggested that all of the gold inside Fort Knox has been stolen, despite there being no evidence to back that up. And two, not one, but two, a former finance secretary saying, no, last time they checked, that gold is still there.
Talk to my audience about chemtrails and RFK Jr.
So RFK Jr. is, of course, now the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, who has recently pledged his agency's support in the battle against chemtrails. Now, these are not a real thing. They're actually contrails, which are essentially the water vapor that comes out of the engines of high-flying aircraft. Now, it seems that RFK has bought in at least somewhat into a conspiracy theory that those contrails are actually full of toxins that, according to some people, are used for mind control or to control the weather. And so he has said that his agency will be there to fight the good fight against that.
And you write that there's a kind of misdirection or three-card Monte effect to all this, meaning you look over here, but the real action is over here, and that may serve a governmental purpose, though not easily detectable one?
Yeah, so several of the experts that I've spoken to about political communications have explained that if you're promising people something that they can't really fact check, like you're solving the chemtrail problem when chemtrails don't actually exist, you take their attention away from real problems, problems that you should probably be focusing on with policy or funding. But if you're distracting them, you don't have to prove that you've solved or have not solved those very real problems that people are dealing with.
Is anyone in Congress doing this?
Is anyone in Congress doing this? I would say quite a few. There's a woman named Anna Paulina Luna, who is now a second-term representative from Florida, who is heading a task force to declassify federal secrets, who believes that there were two shooters involved in the JFK assassination. So she's now in charge of looking into conspiracy theories. I guess she wouldn't call them conspiracy theories, but ideas of unidentified anomalous phenomenon, or UFOs, the COVID-19 pandemic, and files related to 9/11, and Jeffrey Epstein's client list.
Tiffany Shu of the New York Times. Fascinating read. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Stock market up big today after the U.S. and China announced a deal, kind of temporary, but a deal nonetheless, reducing existing tariffs, which of course were just raised a little while ago. More ahead on that deal and its potential economic consequences right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. All three major stock indices were up today after news about the United States and China announcing what appears to be a kind of easing, maybe significant easing of tariffs. Dow Jones, NASDAQ, S&P all up. And up a lot. It's a big day for traders. I want to bring to the table for the first time, but I hope not the last time, Idris Kaloun. He's the Washington bureau chief for my absolute favorite magazine. They call it a newspaper. We call it a magazine, The Economist. It's great to have you here. I really do hope you'll come back. So give me your overall hot or lukewarm take on the importance of what was announced by China and the United States.
Well, markets don't like tariffs.
Right, of course.
This is not a revelation. But I think it was a better deal than people were expecting, clearly. The markets didn't think that much was going to happen in Switzerland. Something did, and actually was a lot better than they thought it would be. It's a reversion to 10% tariffs from China on America, 30%. That's a lot different from 145, 125. These were the levels that we had before.
Which was an effective embargo.
Yeah.
There was nothing happening.
Yeah, there was, I think there was a 20% drop off in exports in April. That was going to go even further. Businesses were going to have to reconfigure their supply chains. Now there's a 90-day reprieve.
And the market was happy about it because as I was listening to those who analyze the market and do so on an hourly basis, which I don't, were like, they're basically declaring an end to this war, that it's not going to happen and things are probably going to get lower and closer to where they were when President Trump was inaugurated.
Scott Bessent talked about this in Geneva. He suggested that the tariff rate might ultimately be somewhere between 30% and 54%, which is still a lot higher.
Still a lot higher.
Still a lot higher, but relative to what they were facing before of 150%, it's a lot better.
And would 54% or even 30% get anywhere close to generating genuine revenue for the United States government that didn't previously exist and incentivize what's known as reshoring, bringing manufacturing or production that's in China currently back to the United States?
So there's a contradiction, right, where if you want manufacturing to be rebased in America, you need the tariffs to be on and you need them to stay and you need certainty.
90 days doesn't get that.
Doesn't get you that. So there are no supply chains that are going to be moving back here. You might get some tariff revenue, not meaningful enough to offset, say, the tax cuts that are also coming down the pike this time around.
And would 30% or 54%, which, as you said, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, indicated might be possible, that would be reflected in the cost of a lot of consumer goods. Americans are pretty if not reliant on, accustomed to.
Yeah, we might see, further exemptions for things like iPhones that customers face, but there will also be a hodgepodge of other tariffs on sectors like aluminum, semiconductors, these sorts of things. So it's going to be complicated for businesses. Consumers probably won't face the empty shelf problem at a 30% level. That's something that businesses will be able to tank, even though the cost will be passed on. But I think what we might also see is that, this idea that you mentioned earlier of, decoupling from China, moving to Vietnam, India, these other bases, that'll all depend on those negotiations, right?
Right. And if you settle with the Chinese first or get to them first, what incentives do those in India or Vietnam or elsewhere have to think that the leverage the president talked about is true leverage?
Right.
Because it appears that this is a backing away on the administration's part. They started this conversation. They now appear to have backed substantially away from it.
Yeah, the Chinese are interpreting this as a win for them because Xi Jinping was defiant. He was the country that imposed retaliatory tariffs. He imposed these restrictions on rare earth minerals, and he got the president to back down. And that's being seen in China as a victory for him. Other countries, will not have the heft that China does, but they see this as, Trump's commitment is not as ironclad as they thought. And the markets clearly believe that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be as high as they are today.
And quickly evaluate what was ballyhooed last week that the markets were not all that impressed with, the UK-US trade deal.
Right. Again, that is something that takes the UK back to 10% trade deal or 10% tariff rate, which is a lot higher than it was before. In fact, it's higher than when they started. So the UK offered us concessions. The US is still giving them a 10% rate. And that's for a country that has a trade surplus with, America's sending more than it's receiving. So for a lot of countries, it wasn't seen as great. And also, it's the first deal that was cut out of maybe 70 that need to be cut with America's closest ally. And so I think that this led people to think that the further deals were not going to be all that much either.
And what about this conversation with China, how you've given us a sense of how Xi Jinping is interpreting it, and certainly how state-run media in China, one and the same, is interpreting it. How do you think those with the European Union are interpreting it and the future of negotiations with this administration?
So the Europeans don't want to escalate in the way that China did, but they're ready to. They're preparing a measure of packages. If these reciprocal tariffs go back into effect, they want to hit us where it hurts, and they think that they know what those sectors are going to be.
Meaning super high-profile, well-liked consumer goods that Americans purchase as imports from European Union countries.
Absolutely, and things that we export to them. Bourbon is a favorite of them because it's made in Kentucky, my home state, but other areas as well.
And if you were to offer a sort of summary of what this month and a half has been in the trade conversation with the Trump White House 2.0, and that's not an easy thing for me to ask you, but if I were, how would you answer that?
It is, I think, the end of the free trade order. We had a scenario in which tariffs were really low, close to zero. Now they're back up to, even now, levels that are as high as they were in the Smoot-Hawley tariff days that preceded the Great Depression.
That's right.
That's a century that's really kind of changed.
Idris Kaloun of The Economist. Thank you so much. Please come back. That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report is coming up next, right here on CBS News 24/7.